All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to folks who are joining today from various parts of the world. I'm DJ. I head marketing at Entytle. We will get started shortly. I see folks and attendees are still joining in, so let's give them a minute. Please stand by. Okay, I think we have a bunch of people who joined the webinar already. So first off, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, I'm DJ. I head marketing at Entytle. We expect the event runtime to be close to 30 minutes, and I hope that you get the most out of it. Let's go to the rules of the road. There's a Q&A area for questions to the speaker. You'll find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, along with all other buttons on your Zoom bar. So please use that Q&A button for asking questions. There's also a chat button that you'll notice next to it that you can use to raise any technical issues during the course of the event. The recording and event deck would be shipped out to you post the event. With that, let me go ahead and introduce the speaker of the day. We have today Rohit, who goes by Roy, and he has recently joined us as Head of Customer Success and Services, building our latest offering, which is the Aftermarket Acceleration Services. With this solution, Roy is designing what we consider a service that will help our customers accelerate growth in aftermarket revenues. In fact, many of you might already know him as the founder and CEO of Mashik, which is a Swiss SaaS startup active in the industrial asset management space. So he has been involved with machinery companies for close to a decade. Prior to building Mashik, he headed digital services for the industrial automation giant Schneider Electric, and has held various other roles that brought together IT, automation, and aftermarket services. So with that introduction, Roy, I hand this over to you.
Thank you, DJ. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Roy, and I'll be walking through the next few minutes, talking to you about aftermarket acceleration in general, but specifically about Order Desk. Now, I assume if you have joined this call, it's because you are a leader in the aftermarket space, probably in the machinery industry, and you are looking for avenues of growth. And this is precisely what we're going into. Now, if you are joining this meeting, in a nutshell, what I want to leave you with at the end of this meeting is this: why I believe order desks today are inefficient and why it matters. If you're looking to go from reactive sales to proactive sales in the aftermarket, whether it is for spare parts, whether it's for services, why your order desk is the place to start. I'll give you tips and maybe a 3-step strategy, as I call it, to go from reactive to proactive sales. And a word of caution, because I see, as we speak with our customers as well, a lot of companies trying to do something that we believe isn't in the right order of things. And feel free to ask us questions. I'll be more than happy to share experiences and insights that I've gained talking to customers in the machinery space. Okay, let's get started. So if you are in the aftermarket space, you're clearly looking at growth. And why this is important for the machinery industry in general is because a lot of customers that we speak with, especially large listed machinery companies, they do roughly about 50% of revenue, 30% of revenue and 50% of gross margin purely from spare parts and services. So this is a gold mine. And in many cases, it's an untapped gold mine because a lot of companies service less than 50 to 60% of their install base, which means there's a massive amount of customers and operators of existing equipment out there in the wild that if you're able to contact, if you're able to build a sales relationship with on the services side, on the aftermarket side, this could be the next big driver of growth for the entire company and not just for the aftermarket. But it requires something that we haven't seen happen across the machinery world, and that is proactive selling. Now, what do I mean by that? So what do I call reactive selling is very simple. It's waiting for customers to contact you. They operate your machines. They know who you are. They will call you when they need something. And what that means is that your order desk is always on a reactive mode, you can't anticipate when customers will contact you. You can't anticipate your customers' needs. And what that means is your aftermarket margins are loose. And when I say loose, what I mean is that it's not consistent across a customer segment. It's really the pricing and the volumes that you trade with certain customers in certain segments are not disciplined and are not necessarily repeatable. And also, uh, you have a loose wallet share in your customers since you don't attack these accounts in a disciplined manner. What it means is year on year, you're not consistently growing your wallet share. And as a result of a lot of this, quite often some of your own dealers are taking some of the aftermarket revenue that you could be booking yourself in certain geographies. And in other cases, it could be competitors and third-party vendors of certain OEM parts. So that's what we see when we speak of reactive selling. But what changes when you move to proactive is you are actually reaching out to inquire about your customers' needs, whether it's for parts or services. You're actually designing services, SLAs, based on the needs of your customers. So it's actually more conversational and it's very interactive. You're seeking out opportunities. And when you do this, you're not just growing your wallet share, you're probably taking the wallet share of some of your competitors and even peers in the install base, in the location that your customers are operating your machines. That's why I think it's important. And this is an untapped gold mine for a lot of machinery companies. Even this morning, we were speaking with customers that wanted to do this in a more disciplined and repeatable manner. And I suspect that's pretty much the case across the machinery industry. Now, if you're going to do that, why start with the order desk? Because today, most of your service sales or your spare part sales people are actually operating your order desk. And if you can imagine, or if you speak with them, they'll tell you that an average customer call takes about 30 minutes. And in those 30 minutes, they're actually asking, who are you, Mr. Customer? What's the project number? What's the equipment serial number? What part are you looking for? Let me find that part. Oops, it's obsolete. Let me find the replacement part. And when they've done all of that, it takes between 1 and 3 days for you to actually return with a quote to the customer. And it's all that time that you're giving the customer to basically repeat this exercise with other companies that are also offering these parts. And that's basically crowding out you and the opportunity that you have. And this is basically what you want to avoid. So the shorter you're able to make that, the better it is. And from a cost perspective, the process cost, the sales order process cost for each incoming order is about 200, between 180 and $200, which is actually pretty high because several orders aren't even worth about that much in terms of value. It really depends. But that's the kind of spectrum that you're looking at, which is why it makes sense to improve efficiency in the order desk. And every resource that you free up from taking the call or answering an email is an additional feet on the street, I would say, that you could actually push towards proactive selling, where actually visiting your customers and building relationships that eventually translate into revenue. And that's something that you can only do, especially in today's climate, by finding efficiencies in different parts of your operations. And that's why I believe this is the right place to start. Okay, let's move on. Now, I spoke of the 3-step framework. Typically, what we see is it's very hard. I mean, we see a lot of customers, and that was basically what I wanted to talk about. A lot of companies are talking e-commerce today, and that's a great goal to have. But if you are sitting on data that are locked up in PDFs that are probably scanned from documents from 20 years ago, and today your order desk spends a lot of time actually opening up these documents, looking for the right place where they find the part number, looking at that part number in your ERP system. It's a lot of manual processes that you can't take to e-commerce straight away, because this is not an experience a customer is willing to do on your behalf just because they have today a customer portal where they can log in. It's, I think, ideal, but it's not what's happening. In most cases, what we are seeing is e-commerce portals that are done this way, they have very little in terms of customer uptake. They might have a really nice interface, but if the data is not up to the mark, if a customer sees 2, 3, 4 different references for the same part number with different prices, different delivery dates, the first thing that the customer will basically do is to say, I'm going to stop here and pick up the phone and call my friend Joe at the order desk. And that basically nullifies all of the investments that companies have made in the e-commerce portal. So instead, if you can actually start from the basics, build a data foundation where you're progressively digitizing the documents and catalogs that are actually servicing most of these inquiries that are coming to your order desk. And it's easy to even prioritize. You just look at the documents of assets that are from customers who are actually doing business with you. It's a good place to start. And as you progressively digitize these, it makes it possible then to automate the incoming order handling process. What I mean by that is a lot of the data entry happens manually, and that's room for not only a lot of time being consumed for your order desk, but it's also a place where you introduce the chance of errors, and that in turn translates into returns, wrong orders, and a bunch of things, right? So if you can digitize first, then you have the opportunity to automate. And basically, an incoming inquiry can go straight into your ERP system with very minimal manual intervention from your team, potentially to validate that the data is right and the price is good. And from there, once you've done that enough, comes the next step, which is basically how about I let that entire process in the hands of my customers and they can actually pull that off. When we see companies do this, the e-commerce experience is much better for the customer, and the customer uptake is also much more likely. In fact, what we see regarding e-commerce especially is the fact that it works very well with your dealers because they have high volumes of purchasing, and it is actually in their core process flow to do that purchasing, which is where I think e-commerce actually adds efficiencies on their side. So this is what we see when e-commerce is instead actually positioned to the end operators. It's a lot less likely that you see a regular enough usage of the system that could justify the investments that are necessary. So that's been our experience so far. And I'd love to hear if yours has been different. We'd love to hear how you're doing it, because there are probably best practices there that we could actually cross-pollinate with other companies. Okay, let's go further. Now, we spoke of catalog digitization, right? Now, what I mean by that is basically extracting useful information that can help accelerate identifying what is the part that the customer needs to buy. Is it in stock? What is the price? When can it be delivered? Now, if this information can be brought up on the screen of an order handler straight out, the 30 minutes can be brought down to potentially 10. And that could in turn mean he's not only processing more order lines, but also attending more customer calls, which would be how you drive efficiency. Now, the one challenge there is this is not the core competency that is within machinery companies. So our recommendation there is to find partners who can help you do that. We can do that, but there are potentially others as well. We are offering this service since a few weeks ago. We already have some companies that are working with us on that. But if you are looking to basically open up all your machine documentation and extract that data, parsing through all of those PDFs, potentially even scanning the images to get the text out, which is called OCR, and then feeding that into a system which your order desk handlers can actually access, that's basically what we want to do. And obviously, like I said earlier, you reduce manual error and you increase throughput. Once you've done that, speaking of automation, I spoke of that earlier. Basically, what we are saying here is once that process becomes smoother for your people, over time, you could reduce the amount of manual work that's going in as you increase the confidence rate in how this entire process is flowing. And you can actually do that with software. And as you do that, you get to a stage when you're ready for e-commerce. And that's basically what we get to in the next stage, like I was saying earlier. So your customer enters into a portal where he can find his or her equipment, find the latest parts, find out that certain parts they have in their as-built documentation is obsolete, find the new part that's available, find the price and availability for these parts, and then go ahead and download a quote and then place an order through their ERP systems, which is how we see a lot of companies do it. So this is possible to do, and that's basically what I call the three-step process. And I say there are basically 4 P's in order to make the successful transition. First is planning. When I speak of planning, I'm saying this is not a one-step process. You have been, in many cases, selling machines for decades. You have to figure out how you want to go about it, where are the benefits for your teams and for your customers. As you do that, you'll be able to prioritize what scope is interesting for you and for your customers. This could be based on transactions, it could be based on relationships, it could be based on equipment age, where you see more service potential. And all of these things would determine where to start and how far to go. Because one thing that we constantly discourage the customers to do is to boil the ocean, as we say it, which is basically say, I have a few 100,000 documents here from all the equipment we've ever sold. Let's digitalize all of this. Now, that's a recipe for disaster. It's basically how projects never finish. It's much better to do that in small bites, like our CEO Vivek likes to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's kind of how we recommend going around prioritizing this work. Obviously, working with partners makes sense, but I think a critical aspect of this is patience. And when I say patience, I don't mean that you have to wait for very long to start seeing results, but you have to commit to a long process where you break this into smaller steps and stages, and you determine an ROI and a business case for each of those stages. And it's possible to do that. We're more than happy to talk to you in depth in order to walk you through how you should go about doing it. I think it's going to be very customized to your business realities, to the countries and geographies where you have the business potential and the efficiency potential. So you'll have to look at all of that. And going from there, what are the steps? Like I said earlier, digitization, automation, and then e-commerce. So that's about it. I'll stop there. I know we've done this relatively quickly, but it gives us more time for questions. DJ, over to you.
All right. Thanks for that, Roy. Before we jump into the question, folks, you see a QR code on your screen right now. You can always scan this QR code using a mobile phone. It takes you to the aftermarket maturity survey. It'll help you benchmark your aftermarket practices with those of the industry leaders. Of course, this survey is based on our experience of working with quite a number of customers and with almost $350 billion assets under management. So this is a great opportunity. You can just whip out your phone and go ahead and scan this QR code. At the very least, you'll get the URL, and then you can always go ahead and access the survey later. There's even an offline copy of this survey available in case you want to go ahead and download that as a spreadsheet, which you can work in a completely offline manner. We don't store any of your data. So while we have that up there on the screen, I think I've got about 3 questions. 3 questions that came in, Roy. Let's try and get through them. And first one is from Chris. I think it's a pretty basic question. I can relate to it. How is automation different from IoT automation? I think they're referencing this stage 2 of your 3-step framework.
Yeah, let me pull that up. So that's a good question, because in the machinery world, automation simply means PLCs, variable speed drives, and a bunch of contactors and so on. And that's the world I come from. So here, what we're talking about is really the software worlds and the process worlds automation, which is simply removing humans from the process of taking a customer order intake, right? So that's the automation that I mean. But that's still a relevant question given the audience. So thank you for that question. I hope that's clear. So we are not talking about IoT automation.
All right. Okay, the next one's from Pete. There are a lot of machinery companies that went straight to offering e-commerce portals. Did they all face these challenges? Pete doesn't specify exactly which challenge, but I think the context is clear, and they're referencing stage 3 of the journey.
Yeah, so that's a good question. See, what I've seen, and I'd love to hear the opinion of anybody else who's actually deployed e-commerce, who's on the meeting, is where e-commerce in the spare parts world works very well is when it is actually exposed not to end operators of equipment, but to dealers and wholesalers of parts and machines. Why I make that difference is very simple. Now, in the core business process flow of the end operator, maintenance is necessary, it's important, but it is not part of the core flow. It is in most cases what in a company would be called indirect purchasing. So they are looking for efficiencies there, but it is something that they do at scale, and they like to look at it from across multiple different suppliers, try to find the right prices, the right availability, and so on. And for them, the experience of going into individual e-commerce portals is a bridge too far, unless they have a massive relationship with a few suppliers, in which case it could actually work. That's what I've seen. Now, it doesn't mean they don't use it. It also doesn't mean that these portals don't succeed. It's just from an ROI perspective, the amount of work that goes into automating the entire request to quote, to purchase order, to invoice, to delivery documentation is a pretty long process. It has to be fully automated in order for a customer to really benefit from the e-commerce, and as well for the machinery company to actually benefit from automating the whole process, right? So it's a pretty big upfront investment, and that is something where I've seen so far. The company that I've seen, they seem to have a very sketchy uptake from their customers. So they do a pretty good job with deployment, but they see that customers are logging in maybe once every 3 months, maybe not at all, and then going back to the order desk, because that's an easy process. It doesn't require any learning. Whereas every time they log in, they forget their passwords, they need to reset their passwords, and they have to relearn the experience of ordering parts, and they generally tend to be lazy. Whereas for a distributor or a dealer, this is a higher frequency transaction. So they work with machinery companies at a more frequent level, um, uh, more frequently. So the transactions are more frequent. Therefore, the experience is something that they learn from and benefit from doing often. And it's also easy for them to kind of look at things like delivery and so on one portal. And that's I think the benefit that they see. That's I think the difference I make on the e-commerce side. I hope that answers the question.
All right. I think I have one more question to go. And this is more broad-based. Joseph says, how do you expect AI to change the landscape when it comes to aftermarket?
That's a question. That's the $1 million, or maybe even the $1 trillion question, going by valuations right now, right? So, well, we see a fair number of areas where AI can be useful. In fact, we've even piloted some of that ourselves. So let me give you some examples of where I see AI working well. If you have documentation that's been scanned for equipment documentation with parts lists in that's been scanned, in order to make sense of it and digitalize it based on a scanned document, AI does a really good job of automating that job, the entire process. If you're looking at 1,000 documents, 100 different pages of part lists with different sub-assemblies and so on, it's an area where AI can do that job pretty well, especially in terms of training the system to recognize what's happening, labeling data correctly, and so on. This is stuff that AI can do accurately and diligently at scale that humans would probably get bored doing. So that's one area where I see this definitely working well. The next place is what I start to believe is actually the future of e-commerce. And it's not really a customer portal, but more like a chatbot. Today, everybody is using Microsoft Teams, especially in large companies. You could very easily, once you have data cleaned and structured on your side for any given customer, it's going to be easy to train chatbots on that data and then basically deploy that chatbot inside your customer's Teams environment. And they are actually chatting with a chatbot instead of with your order desk. And the scope of the data that is accessible to that chatbot is simply the data of that customer and potentially any other knowledge base that the machinery company is willing to also expose, right? And then you're not expecting a customer to log into your portal, but you are actually all the time present where they are working. And that doesn't have to stop at spare parts. It can go into things like, what is my service entitlement? It could be about scheduling the next service visit, where it's actually doing that, linking into your scheduling system. It could be about generating quotes on the fly, where it's actually bringing that data from your ERP systems. I suspect that's where this will go eventually, but it's very early days. Very early days. That's about it, DJ.
All right, Roy. I think that's all the questions we had. Yeah, I'm just checking. Okay, yeah, that's the last of them. And I think we're good to go. So we'll give 5 minutes back to the folks who've joined. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us today. And we hope to see you at the next event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.